The sun was barely a glimmer over the edge of the prairie when Samuel Dwyer saddled up his mare. Dawn painted the sky in quiet pinks and cold oranges, brushing faint warmth onto the faded roof of his barn and the long, weathered fences stretching toward the hills. He moved without hurry but with certainty, his boots stirring dust as he fed the cattle and checked the hinges on the gate for the third time that week. Nothing was broken, but Samuel checked them anyway. A quiet man learns to find order where the world forgets it. The ranch had been his father's, and before that his grandfather's. Land was the one inheritance that stayed loyal, unlike people. Samuel ran it alone now. No hired help, no wife, no children shouting through the yard. Just the wind, the cattle, and the hollow ache of days that ran together like footprints in mud. He didn't mind the silence. Not anymore. At 37, Samuel carried his age not in his posture but in the weight behind his eyes. A strong man by any measure, he could lift a bale, fell a tree, and ride across the ridge in a single day's work. But strength wasn't what haunted him. It was the secret he kept beneath that strength, one word that echoed every time someone asked why he never remarried. Infertile. It had broken his first marriage. Emily had stayed for 5 years, longer than anyone expected. She'd cried, begged, prayed, blamed herself, blamed him, blamed God. Samuel had just taken it all in quiet, like he did every storm. One day she stopped waiting for a miracle and left. He hadn't blamed her. She wanted a family. He only had a farm. Since then, the ranch had become his only companion. The cows didn't ask questions. The horses never looked at him with disappointment. And the dogs always stayed. By the time Samuel finished his morning rounds and cleaned himself up, the sun was high enough to remind him he was due in town. He needed salt blocks, replacement latches, and a few sacks of oats. More than that, he needed to trade 2 heads of cattle, nothing fancy, just routine. He hitched up his wagon and rode down the dirt road with the calm rhythm of a man who'd long stopped expecting surprises. Hollow Creek wasn't much to look at. A scattering of wooden buildings, a saloon with broken piano keys, a general store, and a clapboard church. But every second Saturday, the auction yard filled with men from across the county, all looking to trade livestock or pick up extra tools. Samuel nodded to a few familiar faces, tied off his horse, and walked toward the auction pens. The air smelled like sweat and hay and cheap chewing tobacco. It was loud, restless. Men haggled, spat, laughed too loud. The auctioneer barked bids like a preacher delivering fire. Nothing out of place, until it was. The shouting died down for a moment. Samuel had just leaned against the fence when he heard a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't a cow or a goat. It was the muffled cry of a child. He looked up. There, on the platform, wasn't livestock. It was a woman. Bruised, barefoot, face half hidden behind tangled, wind-beaten hair. Her dress, if it could be called that, hung loose over her heavily pregnant belly. Behind her stood 2 children, no older than 6 or 7. A boy clutched her skirt with one hand, holding his little sister with the other. She didn't cry. She just stared. They all did. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some cleared their throats. Others sneered. But no one spoke. "This here," the auctioneer declared, "is Clara Bell and her 2 little ones. Widowed 6 weeks ago. Husband died owing debts to Mr. Latham's trading post. With no papers, no family, and no property, these here folks fall under the debt transfer clause." Samuel felt his stomach knot. "This ain't right," someone muttered near him. "She ain't property," said another. But no one stopped it. Clara's eyes scanned the crowd. They weren't begging. They weren't hopeful. They were empty. The auctioneer rattled off the starting bid. Low, insulting, $50. No hands went up. "She's a hard worker," he added, sensing the tension. "Knows laundry, cooking, sewing. Strong back, healthy boy. Quiet girl. And she's about to give you another." Laughter rippled across the pen. Samuel didn't move. "Come on now, here's 3 for 1. You won't find a better bargain. Can't have kids of your own? Here's a whole family ready-made." That did it. Samuel's jaw clenched. Somewhere in the back of his memory, Emily's voice screamed inside him. The tests, the quiet doctor's office, the silence afterward. The way she said, "I want a child, Sam. I want to feel something grow inside me." He'd failed her, and now here stood this woman. Life already inside her, children already clinging to her, not asking for charity, not begging to be chosen, just enduring the cruelty of strangers. Samuel raised his hand. The auctioneer paused. "Mr. Dwyer? Full amount," he said. "No need for a bargain." A stunned silence rippled through the crowd. "No counterbids?" the auctioneer asked, looking around. Men looked at their boots. Someone spat. "Sold," the man muttered, unsure whether to smile or apologize. Samuel stepped forward. Clara's shoulders tensed. Her son pulled tighter to her leg. The girl stared wide-eyed at him. He stopped just short of the platform, looked up into Clara's face. He said nothing at first. Then he reached out a hand, not to grab, not to claim, but simply to offer. "Come with me," he said. The children looked to their mother. Clara didn't move. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her eyes flicked between Samuel's weathered face and the faces of the men who'd just watched her humiliation. Was this freedom? Cage, or another cage? She stepped down slowly and took his hand. Samuel didn't speak much on the way back to the ranch. He kept his hands firm on the reins and his eyes ahead, not out of coldness, but to give Clara the dignity of silence. She sat in the back of the wagon, one arm around her belly, the other wrapped protectively around her daughter. Her son sat on her other side, half-turned, never once taking his eyes off Samuel's back. His face wasn't angry, just cautious, like a pup watching to see if the stranger reaching for it meant harm or help. The wagon creaked and rattled over dry road, the dust rising behind them in a trail that dissolved into the wind. The closer they got to the ranch, the more the air changed. Cleaner, quieter, grass stretching in gold waves, fences standing straight in orderly rows. Chickens pecked at seed near the porch steps, and the distant shape of cattle drifted along the far field. It was a quiet kind of place. A place that asked nothing but your labor and rewarded it with peace. Samuel stopped the wagon near the main house. He climbed down and walked around to help. But Clara was already moving. She didn't want to be lifted, didn't want hands on her. He respected that. He backed up a step, letting her decide. She stepped down carefully. Her daughter clung to her skirt. Her son, more independent, dropped to the ground with a thud and stood tall, his chin lifted. "This way," Samuel said, not forcing a smile, just keeping his voice low. He led them past the porch, into the house. Inside was simple, clean wood floors, oil lamps on the walls, a wide hearth at the center. The kitchen opened into the main room, where a sturdy table stood with 4 chairs. One had a carved notch in the back where Samuel used to lean too far during meals. The scent of pine wood and old books lingered in the air. "I made up the guest room," he said. "Back left, has 2 beds and a crib, fresh linens, stove if it gets cold." Clara said nothing, but her eyes flicked toward him, not thankful yet, not angry, just watching. "There's water in the basin," he added, nodding toward the washstand. "And stew in the pot, if you're hungry." The boy's stomach growled loud enough to fill the silence. Samuel pretended not to notice. He turned, walked to the back door, and grabbed 2 more buckets of feed. He wasn't hungry himself, but he always fed the horses before sundown. By the time he returned, the stew pot was empty. That night, Samuel slept on a bed of hay in the barn. He didn't lock the door to the house, didn't ask questions, didn't hover. He just let the night settle in around them. The horses shifted. A coyote howled far off in the hills. And somewhere in the house, a baby kicked in the dark, waiting to arrive in a world too cruel too early. The next morning, Samuel went about his usual chores. He didn't expect help, he didn't ask for it. But when he returned from the field, the porch had been swept. The dishes in the basin were clean. Someone had folded the blankets by the fire. He found Clara in the garden, out back, bent slightly, one hand on her belly, the other pulling weeds from between the onions. Her son knelt beside her, mimicking her movements, The little girl chased butterflies a few steps away. "You don't have to," Samuel said gently. Clara straightened, wiped sweat from her brow. "I know," she said. It was the first thing she'd said to him since the auction. Later that day, Samuel found a chipped teacup on the windowsill. Inside was a small wildflower bouquet. Nothing fancy, just purple bellflowers and sprigs of prairie grass. The kind of thing a child gathers when they don't know how else to say thank you. That night, Samuel made cornbread. Clara took seconds. The days passed like that. Quiet, careful, building trust without words. Clara didn't ask for anything. She cleaned, cooked, rested when her body forced her to. The boy, Nathaniel, he finally learned, watched everything. Smart kid, protective. But after a week, Samuel caught him sneaking sugar cubes for the horses. When Samuel raised an eyebrow, Nathaniel froze, expecting a scolding. Instead, Samuel handed him a brush. "Want to help?" he asked. Nathaniel stared at him for a long beat, then nodded. It became routine. Mornings, Nathaniel helped with feed. Afternoons, Susie helped Clara hang laundry. At night, Clara sat by the fire, her hand cradling her stomach, eyes flicking toward Samuel when she thought he wasn't looking. One evening, the storm rolled in. It was one of those sudden summer storms that came fast and mean. The sky went from bright blue to bruised gray in minutes. Wind howled. The barn door slammed. Samuel rushed out to secure the livestock. By the time he came back in, soaked to the bone, Clara was standing in the center of the living room, pale and shaking. "My water broke," she whispered. Samuel blinked. The storm cracked lightning across the horizon. Thunder followed like a war drum. He moved quickly. Nathaniel stood frozen by the wall. Susie cried. Samuel lifted her into Nathaniel's arms. "Stay in the front room. Don't open this door." He turned to Clara, who clung to the table, breath coming sharp and fast. "You ever done this before without a midwife?" "No," she gasped. Samuel had no answers, no books, no experience, just hands and instinct. He boiled water, gathered towels, rolled up his sleeves. Clara screamed once, then again. Then again. The wind beat the windows as if trying to claw its way in. Sweat poured from her skin. Blood followed. Samuel held her hand through it all, even when she bit down on it so hard he bled. The baby came just after midnight. A girl. She didn't cry at first. Samuel wiped her face, cleared her nose, tapped her back, begged. And then came the wail. Loud and furious. A sound like the world insisting it wasn't done yet. Clara collapsed. Samuel swaddled the baby in a clean cloth, then turned to Clara. Her face was ghost white. Her eyes fluttered shut. He pressed his fingers to her pulse. Still there. Barely. He stayed by her side all night, the baby tucked into the crook of his arm. He didn't sleep, just watched her breathe. Dawn came. The rain stopped. The storm was gone. Clara opened her eyes. Her first sight was Samuel, slumped in the chair beside the bed, holding her newborn against his chest like something he'd never dreamed he'd touch. She whispered, "You stayed." He nodded once. "She's beautiful," she added weakly. "She's strong," he said. There was a long silence. Then Clara reached out and rested her hand on the baby's head. "Grace," she whispered. "Her name is Grace." Samuel didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat burned with emotion he didn't have the right to name. The baby stirred. Samuel stood and gently placed her beside Clara, then stepped back to give them space. His hand hovered awkwardly by his side. "I'll go get the kids," he said. Before he reached the door, he heard Clara say something so soft it barely reached him. "Thank you." He paused, then walked out into the morning light. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. The ranch shimmered with the freshness of rain. Birds called out like they'd survived something sacred. The world, for all its cruelty, was still turning. And for the first time in years, Samuel Dwyer felt it was turning toward something he might learn to call home. The days that followed Grace's birth settled into a strange kind of stillness, like the breath held between two verses of a hymn. The storm had gone, but its scent lingered in the wet wood and the soft dirt beneath Samuel's boots. The air around the ranch was calm, too calm, the kind of hush that wrapped itself around your bones and warned you not to trust it. Clara barely moved the first 2 days. Her body was too tired, too hollowed out from the birth. Samuel left meals outside her room, checking on her only when she called, which was rare. He'd peek in, see the baby sleeping across her chest, and leave quietly. There was no need to speak. His eyes did the asking, hers did the answering. Nathaniel kept close to the door those first nights. He didn't ask to come in, but he didn't stray far either. He watched Samuel constantly, always calculating, always waiting for the other boot to drop. Samuel knew that look. It was the same one his dog had worn after being kicked by a drunk back when he was a pup. You can't talk a creature out of fear. You just have to wait for it to wear down. So he waited. Susie, on the other hand, bloomed. She took to following Samuel like a shadow, her tiny hands finding rope to tug, hay to scatter, feathers to chase. One morning she handed him a wild feather from a hawk and said, "You should put this in your hat. Looks like a boss feather." He chuckled, and to her delight, he tucked it in behind the band. It stayed there for days. Clara came out for the first time on the third morning. Pale, slow, but upright, Grace bundled to her chest. Her eyes scanned the kitchen and caught Samuel slicing apples for the pigs. "You should be resting," he said without looking up. "I've rested," she answered, her voice flat but firm. He turned. The baby's tiny hands peeked from the blanket like pale moths. Her eyes were shut tight, lips curled in that odd smile babies wear when they dream about things they've never seen. Clara held her like a secret. "I'll make coffee," Samuel offered, already moving toward the stove. "I can do it." He didn't argue. He just handed her the tin. That morning they ate together, the four of them. Grace in Clara's lap, Susie squirming in her chair, Nathaniel quiet, but no longer stiff. Samuel passed the biscuits without a word. Clara poured the coffee without looking up. But something in the silence had shifted. It wasn't heavy anymore, just cautious, like a truce waiting to be signed. After breakfast, Clara returned to her room with the baby. Nathaniel followed, but paused at the door. "Thank you," he said, voice barely a whisper. Samuel looked up from the table. "For what?" the boy shrugged. "For not hurting her." Samuel swallowed hard and nodded once. Clara began taking walks after that, short at first, just around the porch with Grace in her arms. Then farther, along the fence line. Samuel watched from a distance, never joining unless she invited him, which she didn't. But one day she paused and called out, "Can you fix this latch?" He joined her, inspecting the gate. It was loose, just needed a new hinge. "I'll bring my tools," he said. She waited beside him as he worked, arms folded, baby asleep in a sling across her chest. "You ever have any children?" she asked suddenly. Samuel's hand froze over the hinge. "No," he said simply. "Didn't want any?" He hesitated. "I did." She said nothing for a long moment. Then, softly, "Same." The wind shifted, bringing the scent of sweetgrass and sun-warmed earth. Samuel tightened the last screw. "He was cruel," she said then. "My husband. I didn't know it at first. I was 16. He was twice my age, promised to take care of me, thought that meant something." Samuel stood, brushing off his hands, but didn't interrupt. He drank, gambled, took what he wanted, when he wanted. And when there was nothing left, he took us across the country, trying to outrun the debt. I tried to run once. He found me. I never tried again. Her voice didn't tremble. It wasn't confession. It was reclamation. Samuel nodded, quiet. "You're safe now." She turned toward him, sunlight catching in her hair. "You don't know that." "I'll see to it." Clara searched his face for a lie. She didn't find one. Later that night, Samuel sat on the porch. The stars blinked above like old friends. He was whittling a piece of cedar, shaping it without purpose, just to keep his hands busy. Nathaniel came out and sat beside him. "She's smiling again," he said. Samuel didn't respond. "She hasn't done that since Papa died." Samuel set down the wood. "That your real pa?" Nathaniel nodded. "Yeah, the baby's not, though." Samuel tilted his head, surprised. "Mama didn't say it," the boy explained, "but I know. That baby's not his." Samuel didn't press. He just said, "You look out for your family, don't you?" Nathaniel nodded again. "Always." Samuel reached over and handed him the half-whittled toy. It looked like a horse, sort of. Nathaniel turned it over in his hands, then smiled. The days grew longer. The routine settled. Samuel built a small crib for Grace. Clara hemmed curtains for the front window. Susie helped Samuel name a calf Buttercup. The house, once silent, now breathed with laughter, soft voices, and the low music of life returning. One evening Samuel cooked stew. As they sat to eat, Clara spoke across the table. "You're good with them." "I like them," he said plainly. "They like you." Samuel glanced at Nathaniel and Susie, who were whispering to each other about fireflies. "Why haven't you ever married again?" Clara asked. Samuel took a sip of water. "Because I can't give anyone what they usually want." Clara frowned. "Which is?" "Children." The table quieted. Clara looked down at Grace, asleep in her arms. "You already have," she said. Samuel's heart thudded once, deep in his chest, louder than it should have. They didn't speak more that night, but when Clara stood to leave, she didn't say good night. She just brushed her fingers over Samuel's shoulder as she passed. Not affection, not flirtation, just recognition. The next morning, Samuel found her in the garden again, this time singing softly to Grace. The words didn't matter. It was the sound. He watched from a distance, letting himself believe that maybe the walls around him weren't as thick as he'd thought. Maybe, just maybe, they'd been built with doors after all. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Clara came to him on the porch. "I need to ask you something," she said. He set down his book. "What happens next?" she asked. He didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "I mean us. This. Whatever this is. You saved us. You gave us food, safety. But we can't stay like this forever. You're a good man, Samuel. But I need to know what we are." Samuel looked down at his hands, then up at her. "I don't want you here out of debt," he said. "I don't want you to feel owned." "I don't," she said. "I didn't bring you here because I needed workers or someone to cook or someone to keep my bed warm. I brought you here because no one else did. Because I could. Because I've been alone so long, I forgot what it was like to hear laughter in the morning." Clara stepped closer. "You've been kind, gentle, but I need to raise my children in something stable, and they already think of you as family." "I think of them the same," he whispered. Clara's voice dropped, almost inaudible. "So do I." They stood in the hush, stars above, baby Grace crying softly inside. Samuel took a breath. "I could ask you to marry me," he said. "You could," she answered. "But I won't," he added, "unless you want that. Not because you owe me. Not because of what I did." Clara stepped closer, placed her hand on his chest. "Ask me anyway." Samuel looked into her eyes, steady and strong, and said, "Will you marry me?" Clara didn't hesitate. Yes, they stood together as the night wrapped around them. No longer strangers, no longer broken things waiting to be discarded. And inside, Grace slept on, safe in a house that finally had a family. The morning after he asked her, Samuel didn't know how to act. There were no rehearsals for a moment like that. No manual to tell a man how to behave when the quiet widow he'd carried out of an auction said yes to becoming his wife. He woke before dawn, as always, fed the animals, chopped wood, and fixed the gate by the north field that had been swinging too loose. But none of it felt the same. Every sound was sharper. Every step felt heavier. Not in a burdensome way, but in the way of someone realizing they were no longer walking through life alone. Inside, Clara was awake, She'd already dressed, her hair braided down her back, baby Grace tucked against her chest in the sling Samuel had sewn from flour sack cloth. She stood at the stove flipping corn cakes, the smell already filling the house with something that felt more like home than it ever had. Samuel watched her from the doorway a moment too long. She turned, caught his stare, and didn't smile, just looked at him as if she too didn't quite know what came next. "I'll go into town today," Samuel said, breaking the silence. Clara turned back to the pan. "I'll ask Pastor Royce." Her hand paused. "All right," she said. They didn't talk about it more. There was no need. They both knew what that meant. No frills, no lace, no town parade or drunken dancing in the saloon afterward. Just a preacher, a quiet vow, and maybe a shared loaf of bread if the general store had any left unsold. By noon, Samuel was hitched up and headed for Hollow Creek. The town looked the same, dusty and tired, men loitering on corners, some tipping their hats in greeting. But to Samuel it felt different, like he had something under his coat the rest of the world couldn't see. He found Pastor Royce trimming vines around the chapel. "Well now," Royce said, setting down his shears. "Didn't expect to see you till Christmas." "I'm here for a wedding," Samuel said. The old man squinted at him. "Yours?" Samuel nodded once. "I'll be damned," the preacher whispered, then cleared his throat. "Pardon me." "Saturday?" Samuel asked. Royce grinned. "You bring her, I'll bring the words." Samuel bought Clara a ring. It wasn't much, a simple silver band from Miss Carter's shelf, nestled among dusty trinkets and old sewing thimbles. But it was clean, unbent, and warm when he slipped it into his coat pocket. When he returned, Clara was in the yard with the children. Nathaniel was showing Susie how to hold a fishing rod made from a stick and twine. Clara's eyes lifted when she saw him. He didn't speak, he just handed her the ring, her fingers closed around it. She didn't smile, she didn't cry, she nodded. Saturday came too fast, and not fast enough. They dressed in what they had. Samuel wore his cleanest shirt, ironed stiff. Clara had mended a long tan skirt and wore a white blouse with the sleeves rolled up. Her braid was tighter that day. Grace wore a hand-stitched bonnet. Susie carried wildflowers in a small tin can. Nathaniel stood straight beside his mother, one hand gripping her skirt like old times, the other held in Samuel's. The wagon ride was silent, except for the wheels crunching gravel and the wind cutting through the fields. The chapel was nearly empty. Pastor Royce waited at the front. Miss Carter sat in the back, pretending not to cry. A young couple Samuel didn't know very well brought bread and jam. No choir, no music. Just the echo of boots on wooden floorboards and the low whisper of birds nesting in the rafters. "Do you take this man," Royce said, "to be your husband, to walk with him, not behind, not beneath, but beside, through sickness and drought, through hunger and grief?" "I do," Clara said. "Do you take this woman," Royce asked, "and her children as your own, to honor, not possess, to hold not with hands, but with trust?" "I do," Samuel said. The preacher smiled. "Then by what power I've been given, in a town barely big enough for trouble, I say you're bound now. God help you both." Clara looked at Samuel, eyes steady. He looked back and saw, not a broken woman, not a burden, not a mouth to feed, but someone who had lived through fire and still stood tall. They rode home in silence again. But this time, the air wasn't thick, it was warm, full of the quiet noise that only love can make before it learns to speak. The days that followed were not perfect, but they were real. Clara didn't take his name right away. Samuel didn't ask her to. The children didn't call him Pa, not yet. But one night, Susie curled into his lap by the fire without invitation, and Nathaniel asked if he could sleep outside in the barn, like you do. Samuel took each moment like a gift he didn't deserve. He showed Clara how to work the water pump in winter without cracking the joints. She showed him how to boil strips of cloth for diapering when rags ran short. They argued once over how much flour to save, and when it was over, neither of them apologized. They just cooked supper like nothing happened. That, Samuel thought, was better than any sorry ever could be. One evening, Samuel came in late. The cows had broken fence again, and he spent 2 hours in the mud fixing posts in near darkness. He was soaked, tired, hungry. He didn't expect anything waiting for him. But when he opened the door, the fire was lit. His boots were by the hearth, and Clara was standing in the kitchen, holding out a mug of hot broth. He took it wordlessly, fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head. "We're married now. You don't have to thank me." Samuel looked at her then, not as the woman he saved, but as the woman who saved him back. Later, he lay in bed, Clara beside him, baby Grace in her cradle within reach. The house creaked in its old bones. Rain tapped soft on the windows. He listened to Clara breathe. Her back was turned, but she'd left one hand resting near his. It wasn't quite touching, but close enough that if he reached, she wouldn't pull away. He didn't move, just listened to the soft sounds of the life he never thought he'd have. One day, weeks later, he was walking the fence line with Nathaniel when the boy asked something unexpected. "Do you think Pa would have liked it here?" Samuel paused, the question hanging between them like dust in sunlight. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I think he would have," Nathaniel said, eyes squinting at the hills. They walked on. That night, when Susie called him Pa without thinking, Samuel didn't correct her. When Clara looked up from her mending and smiled at him, he smiled back. And when the baby cried, he got up before she did. They weren't built in a day. They weren't born of blood. But somehow, in the quiet of the hills, the walls of the old house, and the soft worn floor under their feet, they had become something whole. A family. The summer faded slowly, but the light changed quicker than the leaves. Mornings came softer, with a golden haze stretched over the prairie like a warm quilt. Nights fell faster. The days between Clara's first steps onto his ranch and the rhythm they now shared were no longer something they counted. They had become something they lived. The house was no longer silent. Footsteps filled it. Laughter echoed through open windows. Pots clattered. Doors slammed. The floor creaked under the weight of life. Grace had begun to smile. Full, toothless grins that made even the hardest chore feel lighter. And when Samuel saw Clara holding her with one arm and kneading bread with the other, hair falling into her eyes, he found himself pausing more and more, just to watch. He had been a man who lived in straight lines. Wake before dawn, feed, repair, ride, sleep, repeat. But now, the lines curved, bent around the sound of children's feet, around Clara's voice humming old songs as she swept the porch, around the soft thud of baby Grace kicking at the air in her cradle. One afternoon, while fixing a hinge on the barn door, Samuel looked up to find Susie carrying a chicken under each arm, her brow furrowed like a tiny farmer. "They won't stay in the pen," she declared. He wiped his hands, took one chicken from her arms. "Maybe they don't like the company," he said. Susie thought hard, then nodded. "I'll build them their own house," Samuel grinned. "I'll get you some nails." Clara started writing again. He noticed it one evening when he came in early from the fields. She sat at the table, a pencil in hand, scraps of paper spread out like fallen leaves. "Didn't know you wrote," he said. "I used to," she replied without looking up. "Poems, letters, lists of things I wanted to do." He approached quietly, reading a line over her shoulder. It wasn't poetry. It was a list. In her neat, slanted script. Plant a peach tree. Teach Susie to read. Let Nathaniel ride alone. Build a bookshelf. Love without fear. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. That week, he brought home a sack of fresh peach seeds from the town store. The next day, they dug the hole together in silence. Susie helped pat down the dirt. Nathaniel hammered a little wooden sign beside it that read, "Clara's tree." Clara stood back and smiled, one hand on Grace's back, the other tucked into Samuel's. Nathaniel began waking earlier, eager to learn the ropes of the ranch. He followed Samuel around with questions, sometimes too many. One morning, after asking about the third time how a crankshaft worked, Samuel handed him a wrench. "Try it." Nathaniel frowned. "What if I break it?" Then you'll know not to do it again." The boy took the wrench. The lesson took twice as long. Samuel didn't mind. That night, Clara whispered into Samuel's shoulder, "He's starting to sound like you." He said nothing, but the way he exhaled told her everything. There were still hard days. Clara had her silences. Moments when she would stare out the window too long. Nights when she would wake with a start, breath shaking, eyes wide, clutching Grace against her chest like the world was coming to take her. Samuel never asked what she saw in her dreams. He just held her. Some wounds didn't need words. They needed patience. One evening in late autumn, while mending the fence by the West Ridge, Samuel caught sight of a rider in the distance. Dust rose behind the figure. As the horse grew closer, Samuel stiffened. The man was unfamiliar, young, lean, with a sharp edge to his eyes and a rifle strapped behind his back. Samuel waited. The man pulled up near the gate, dismounted, and tipped his hat. "Name's Carrick," he said. "Passed through Hollow Creek. Heard there's a woman here. Pregnant widow with 2 kids." Samuel's stomach sank. "She's my wife," he said evenly. Carrick raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" Samuel didn't move. "You looking for trouble?" he asked. The man shrugged. "Nah. Just heard she owed someone something. I collect debts." "She doesn't owe you," Samuel said. Carrick smiled, all teeth. "Maybe not, but she left something behind." Samuel stepped closer. "You're not taking her." "You sure she wants to stay?" Samuel's voice dropped. "You leave now." Carrick looked past him toward the house, as if considering. Then, slowly, he mounted his horse. "Just passing through," he said, "for now." Samuel watched him until the dust settled behind the hills. That night, he didn't tell Clara. He couldn't bear the look in her eyes. But he sat up later than usual, shotgun across his lap, the fire burning low. The next morning, Clara found him asleep on the porch. She said nothing, just sat beside him and handed him a cup of coffee. "You feel it too?" she asked. He nodded. They didn't see Carrick again, but for a while the wind felt colder. Clara pulled the children closer. Samuel kept his tools sharper. They both knew the world had a long memory. But it didn't stop them. Samuel finished building the bookshelf she'd written down. Clara lined it with books she bartered for in town. Nathaniel taught Susie the letters. Susie taught Grace how to clap. Winter came. Snow blanketed the fields. The ranch slowed. Even the animals moved quieter, as if not to disturb the stillness. One evening, while Clara knitted by the fire, Samuel handed her a worn, leather-bound notebook. "What's this?" she asked. "My father's journal," he said. "Thought you'd want to read it. Maybe write in it too." Clara opened the first page. It was filled with crooked scrawl, old dates, memories of harvests and rains, of storms and lean years. She looked up. "You're giving this to me?" He nodded. "It's yours now." All of it. The ranch, the house, the quiet life they had built from scraps. Clara leaned forward and kissed his cheek. It was the first time she'd done it, and in that simple gesture, something old and rusted inside him finally unlocked. That night, when she crawled into bed beside him, she didn't turn away. Her hand found his. Their fingers intertwined beneath the blanket. He breathed her in. Not perfume or powder, but the scent of flour and wool, and something soft beneath it all. The next morning, when Susie woke them shouting about snow angels, Clara laughed freely. They ran outside, bundled in coats too big and boots too loose. Samuel helped Nathaniel build a snowman that looked more like a potato sack with buttons. Clara held Grace under the porch roof, her breath fogging in the cold air. Later, around the fire, Clara leaned into Samuel and whispered, "We're not just surviving anymore. We're living." He looked around, the children asleep on the floor, the fire crackling low, the soft sound of Grace breathing. "You gave me that," she said. "No," he replied, voice rough. "You gave that to me." That night, Samuel dreamed of a life he never thought possible. not a future filled with riches or wild adventures. Just more days like this one, more laughter, more quiet meals, more hands in his. A family built not from blood, but from the courage to begin again. In the heart of the untamed frontier, Samuel and Clara didn't just build a home. They built a life stitched from scars, stitched from second chances. Their love wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, and born not out of perfect circumstances, but from the courage to choose each other day after day. In a world that tried to break them, they proved that family isn't something you're given. It's something you build. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where love, hope, and redemption ride across every prairie. More heartfelt stories of strength, sacrifice, and second chances await. Hit that bell so you never miss the next tale that might just stay with you forever.